Good morning, everyone. It's really good to be here on a beautiful Sunday morning, seeing faces I haven't seen in a while and meeting new ones. Thank you so much for being here today. Our study this morning, which is, here we go. When I was given the topic, I said, wow, what can I possibly say, or better yet, what can I personally get out of this study that I haven't heard or listened to yet or read it myself? And Spiritism has a funny way of surprising us, because when we start reading in depth and searching information in other books and other speakers that we admire, we find that we don't know everything yet about a certain topic. But the most amazing aspect of this study has to do truly with our own relationship with the message of Spiritism that we have had, some of us for maybe a few months, a few weeks, a few years, and even though lifetimes. We know that some spiritists have been in contact with Kardec from speaking with some mediums. I wasn't. I was wasting time somewhere else. I wasn't one of the lucky ones. But how sublime, truly, the Spiritist message is. I was 14 when I arrived in the United States, and by chance, I developed a friendship with a girl whose mother ran a Spiritist center. And so every weekend I would go to the youth education, which was only truly for fun. We had picnics. By the way, we were the ones who conducted the picnics. We conducted garage sales. I remember I still have photos of me trying on really funky clothes to try to get people interested in buying and supporting the Spiritist teachings. But the reason why I'm saying this is because over the years, and I'll be 40 this month, I see how little I am in knowledge of Spiritism. And so I'm very thankful that Susanna Orbiga offered this topic for study today. And I hope that it can touch us all in the manner that it touched me, and providing a moment of reflection about ourselves and our relationship with Spiritism. The newly released book, Prelude to the Divine Kingdom, has narrations as told by the spirit author Amélia Rodrigues, through the mediumship of Divaldo Franco. And she starts narrating that on a very significant sunny morning, where there seems to be scattered clouds in the sky, slowly moving because of the fresh wind that touched everyone who was sitting and listening to the Master, she describes an immense multitude on the ground, farther than the eyes could see. Which I started pondering. How is it that Jesus told parables to a multitude of crowd further than the eyes could see, and everybody heard the message? Anyone ever wonder about that? She explains that it had to do with the content and the vibration of the Master's words that echoed through the wind, touching the core of the hearts that were ready to assimilate the liberating message of the good news. It's interesting. She says, sitting in the boat, Jesus lengthened his gaze over the grounds, the multitude of hearts, and thought of the uncultivated land before him. The uncultivated land before him. Filled with great love for humankind, after speaking of many things, he continued, behold, a sower went out to sow seed, and while he was sowing, some fell beside the road. Considered to be one of the most significant parables as told by Haroldo Dutra Dias, although many people might argue, it's specified in everything that we read, whether it's Spiritist text or other religious and philosophical ideas, that every teaching of Christ was important to the smallest of details that often we don't appreciate or, better yet, understand. And that the parable of the sower is of great importance to us Christians today, 2,000 years later, over 2,000 years later. Amelia Rodriguez states that growing spiritually, it's not a very easy task. And I remember a personal moment in which I started reflecting about growing pains. They say that little kids, when they're growing, they cry because their bones are extending. You guys ever heard that? They cry when they're little? Those who have kids know about this. I remember Susanna and Sherry talking about how Jakey would cry. So growing pains, it hurts to grow. It hurts to spiritually grow as well. When we start thinking about things that we got to modify and change and develop and overcome, it hurts inside to be able to be exposed to things that we still don't appreciate about ourselves. But it's all a process. And it's truly beautiful because Jesus uses often the examples of nature to facilitate our understanding. And how appropriate was the starting message read by Elcio that talked about this, the changes that takes place in nature and the changes that take place within ourselves. So the master resorts to symbolically using the nature to facilitate our understanding. The mustard seed, in comparison, in bringing this idea of the kingdom of heaven to try to explain something that is very simple, maybe for some, to try to grasp the meaning of its message. And so she says, nature follows a course. Sowers sow, crops appear, and the harvest follows. And one of the reasons why perhaps Christ used nature, specifically agriculture, so often to try to establish an easy understanding of his teachings had to do with the fact that a lot of those who listened to him were Galilean farmers. Why do we need to comprehend this 2,000 years later? Well, to try to make it easy for us as spiritists to understand what he tried to say 2,000 years ago as well. So, sowers, landowners, harvesters, those that were attributing their own time in profession for growing crops was a very significant profession at that time. And Haroldo will say that when Jesus would bring forth a significant teaching such as the one that we have today, he would use means that were effective to deliver the message. And now you guys are going to laugh at me because about 2 days ago, my website went down and I had to call GoDaddy. There's nothing to do with it, but just to try to make it clear here. So the guy started explaining to me what went down with my website, and all I heard was, I had no idea what he said. I said, please, talk to me as if I'm a 5-year-old child so that I can understand what's happening. And he did. He made a comparison, utilizing, symbolically speaking, the community in which I live in. He started narrating the story of a loud and rowdy neighbor who was basically impacting the entire neighborhood. That was, wow, that did it to me, right? And as I was preparing for the study, I said, wow, Jesus was really wise because he would utilize the kind of examples, symbols that would make it easy for people to assimilate the message of the good news. 32 parables. I try to open them all, but over 6 or 7 of them talk about nature, talks about crops, talks about harvest, sowing. It's a significant number, yes? What are some of the ones that we remember from the parables that utilizes nature?
Fig tree.
The fig tree. What's another one? We don't need to answer, but we have the mustard seed, we have the parable of the sower, and we have many others that pertaining to also explaining aspects of mediumship, like the fig tree. We recognize the fruit by its tree, and telling us the kind of service that we recognize, whether it's a good one or a bad one. So here, he's cultivating, giving us an idea of a God who plants, observes the growth of the seed, cares for, waters, but also who corrects it, fertilizes, removes toxic weeds, offers nutrients for growth, and harvests. The people who listened to Jesus at that time had a very significant quality. They not only worshipped the altar of nature, by employing their strength, their sweat, using their hands, being faithful to the profession that also contributed for society, but also their own family. But they state that they were also faithful in worshiping the altar of God, the idea of one God. We know about this, yes, as we study this. So, in trying to gather information and speak to the hearts of the farmers who worshipped nature, but also worshipped God, dividing their time between the field and also the synagogues and the temples, Christ saw in those who were listening the soil, the heart that was appropriate for receiving the seed of knowledge. So let's go into understanding a little bit about the people that he spoke to. When he took into consideration the hearts that were listening to him, who were impregnated with the message of the Old Testament. Now, the Old Testament, we have come to realize, had two characteristics. One was of a divine nature, and the other was of a human nature. Moses establishing those laws that were of a divine nature, and then the ones that were appropriate for the mankind of his time, often establishing somewhat of a fearful look for those who were there listening to him. And Christ comes saying, I have not come to destroy the law, but rather to fulfill them. As if talking to the hearts at that time, starting with the parable of the sower and saying, I am not here to modify anything that touches your heart so far. As far as religiousness, not religion, religiousness is concerned. That which touches the core of our heart. Because religions, there are many. And I know many people who are religious who have no religion whatsoever. It has to do with character and contact, moral, the conduct, the ethical codes that people live by, as if it's inserted somewhere, as according to the Spirit's book, in the conscience of the being that guides them and tells them how to live in accordance with the divine law. So he comes to say this in explaining. Why is all of this important for us? Because now we are going to begin with a parable to try to understand a little bit more. And I apologize for the first part there that is cut out. But then he told them many things in parables, speaking to the people and trying to explain, beginning with that phrase right there. A sower went out to sow, and as he was sowing, some of the seed fell by the wayside, and the birds of the sky came and ate them. Other seed fell upon sturdy places where there was not much earth. They soon sprouted because the soil was not very deep. Let's pause for a second. Aside, today when we see people getting their soil, the land ready for planting, we see magnificent machinery that get the land ready for the seeds that are going to be scattered. At that time, the soil was never prepared. The sower scattered its seeds. That's what they did. They didn't prepare the soil ahead of time. After they scattered the seeds, they would utilize some kind of animal to come later using something to plow the land. And stones, thorns, debris, everything would be mixed in, but the seed would find its way into solid ground. And eventually, crops would come out of it. So there was no preparing the land prior, which is an interesting thing. So he begins by saying this, a sower, one man. He didn't tell a third party to go out and do it. It was one person who went out, scattering the seeds, mixing in, not really caring about the kind of soil that was receiving the seeds. The seeds, in accordance with the gospel, according to Spiritism, has to do with the Word of God. So let's start describing a little bit of the parable here. The soil is the hearts of men and women. Interestingly enough, what is the Word of God? Can anybody talk about this here? What is the Word of God to you? Now I want your cooperation. What is the Word of God for you, David?
Love.
Fatima?
Compassion.
Compassion?
All that is.
All that is. So she summed up everything here, so we'll stop at Biga because nobody else needs to say anything else. It's good. All that is. It's words that instruct, that guides, that enlightens, that comforts, that clarifies, that brings about information that makes our life worth living, makes sense out of things. So here he starts describing the seed, something that promotes, that also educates, because God is an educator, a father, offering us the tools, nutrients, everything that is needed so that we can sprout, so that we can grow. The problem is that many of us in the position of the soil that have not yet been prepared, and this is where the invitation comes in from the parable, starts to offer us a moment to reflect. So Spiritism contains the Word of God. Agreed? I'm going to say Spiritism because we are the Spiritist Center and we don't mean any offense to any other type of listeners or people who follow other philosophies. We're in the Spiritist Center and so we're talking about Spiritism. So Spiritism contains the Word of God, something that speaks deep to us, represented here symbolically by a very small seed, something that is very small, that yet provides fruits under the watchful eye of the sower. Christ is the sower. Instinctively, he scatters seeds. So in this room right here, we have incarnated and discarnated spirits that are of different spiritual age. Happy birthday to Patricia, by the way, who celebrated her birthday this week. But from a spiritual point of view, she could be younger or older than I am. The time in which she was created, simple and unaware of the laws. So he scatters the Word of God, showing us how just and good God truly is. Because the Word is not restricted to one person or one type of race. It's for anyone who has ears to hear. It's for anyone. So that's the first teaching that we gather from this parable. The seeds were scattered. And then what happened? The hearts, which truly is the soil, will have the responsibility to understand it. To understand, to take in, to embrace as the soil would a seed. And then the responsibility of each heart to do with that seed as it wishes, as it understands. So let's start talking about the seed. What type of soil? Better yet, what type of heart do we cultivate deep within? Why did he use the soil as a representation of heart? And then for this, we got to go back. In Hebrew, heart was a very significant organ. It wasn't just that which pumped blood. It just wasn't that at all. It was the center of the human thought and spiritual life. Love your Lord, your God, with all your heart, meaning you assimilate first. You bring it in and you internalize from a thought and spiritual life, rationalizing what God means to us. So the heart is a very significant word for the Galilean farmers at that time. It's interesting how Jesus would utilize all of the symbols to try and make sense for us. So the heart listens, assimilates, understands, and responds. And in responding, it answers to the calling of the seed orientation. So if I receive an orientation, the Word of God, through the heart, with all my heart, I'm going to try to assimilate what the message means so that I can put into practice with the religiousness that characterizes my own relationship with my Father above. And he continues, in stating that the different soils that we find in the parable is going to have the characteristics that differs each one of us intellectually and morally speaking. So he scatters the seeds, the Word of God. It falls firstly by the wayside. Understanding that the soil has not been prepared, the wayside is that way in which other crops had already been harvested, picked. So there was a trace, a mark left before. What happens to those that fell on the wayside? You guys remember? Birds. All right? Let's go back there. There we go. Birds of the sky came and ate them. Go forward. There we go. What could this possibly mean? Let's pretend that we are sitting on the side of the road, and I want you guys to mentalize someone that you admire greatly. Someone who is very spiritually evolved. You guys thought of someone? I thought of so many people, but I decided to stay with Jesus. And so the wayside type of soil has to do with people who acknowledge greatness before them, but who won't take the time to go into depth information, wasting an opportunity of utilizing the Word of God for their own lives, the teachings. So from a Spiritist view, we have Christ, we have Kardec, we have Chico Xavier, Divaldo Franco, the voices of the immortal spirits that come through their blessed mediumship. And Kaibar Schutel, which is an amazing Spiritist propagator, stated that it's as if we are students sitting in the classroom, still sleepy, waiting for the clock to ring and give us recess. We just want to play, completely unaware of the greatness before us. And then he goes on to describe another characteristic, the stony place. What happened to the stony place? Did the seeds grow? Huh? They got choked. Let's go back. Should have done this before. Sorry, you guys. There was not much earth. They soon sprouted because the soil was not very deep. But when the sun came up, it scorched them. And since they had no roots, they withered. And here's where, personally to me, it spoke a lot. Spiritual growing pains. Watch yourselves. Might hurt a little. The condition of the hardened heart, as if made up by impenetrable rocks that won't allow new ideas to set in and break through the harshness of our feelings. Kaibar Schutel describes a lot of spiritists of the new era as stony places. Stony place type of soil. He talks about those that received a noble invitation to change, yet they rationalize too much and they don't bring it into the context of the feeling that the message appropriately tries to tell us about modifying. Impenetrable. It can't go in. It stays on the surface. It's not assimilated wholly. It can't find ground to allow the roots to set in. I was telling Marcelo the other day, we have a tree. David, you gotta come and do something because the tree is kind of like this, and it's being held by a cord on the wall. And I'm like, her root, poor thing. So it's kind of like hanging, you know? It's not growing, it's not sprouting. It doesn't have the solid ground to truly penetrate deep in, find stability, and stand tall. And so he describes a lot of the hearts as stony field, stony places. The scorching sun is all the negative tendencies that we have, that we ourselves cultivate, not allowing the seed to sprout as it should. So when situations come in that is challenging, that is demanding, that shows us that being a Christian is not easy, because that's the truth. Being Christian is not easy. Because we're talking about modifying vices and turning them into virtues. Growing pains, spiritual growing pains. Deception sets in, arguments set in, and for the Spiritist worker, discouragement to the point where they want to leave the work, the Spiritist Federation, the Spiritist Center, overall the Spiritist philosophy. So sometimes we will see someone saying, I am so disappointed with Marcelo Paiva, and I'm done going to the Spiritist Center, as if he represents the Spiritist philosophy, as if he's the one who truly represents this liberating message of truth. And we walk away from a philosophy, from a body of knowledge that should be transforming our lives. But yet we get so concerned about what the other is doing that doesn't go in accordance with the Spiritist teaching, and we abandon Spiritism altogether. That's the truth. Divaldo Franco has been suffering a lot of attacks lately because of his position in trying to be faithful to the Spiritist doctrine, body of knowledge. And people start saying, you know, the greatest icon of Spiritism said this and that, and I'm so disappointed I'm leaving Spiritism. Why? Because his idea didn't resonate with your heart. But he is not Spiritism. It's pure. The Spiritist philosophy is a body of knowledge that is pure. It's from the benevolent spirits. It's what we do with it. It's how we apply it so that we become encouraged to continue the work. I like to say that once we start attending the Spiritist Center, that we have an obligation outside of the Spiritist Center also to be Spiritists. Because it's easy to come here every morning on Sunday and hug each other, saying hello in the beginning of the meeting. But it's truly hard to develop a compassionate, unhardened heart and apply forgiveness and understanding and compassion to the ones that are right beside us. How quickly we are to judge. The scorching sun is this type of movement that we employ, withering out the seed and the plant that is about to grow and sprout. Then he talks about those that fell among thorns and they were suffocated, like Veronica was saying to us before. In today's societal relationship, this is extremely important. Alberto Almeida said that we are all thorny people. I automatically imagine what's the little animal called? You know, the one that's filled with... Yeah, the porcupines. We're a bunch of porcupines walking along in society. We all have thorns. Truly, that's the truth. He said, the goal is to try to live with each other without prickling each other, hurting others, and not being so hurt by what others do that are mistakes, that we take it so personally into our own existence. So John Raphael is having a bad day. He is a thorny guy, but so am I. And as soon as he approached me, he throws, let's say, a harsh word, and all the love and relationship that I have with him goes down the drain because he scratched me and made me bleed with his thorn. But why am I so quick to judge him? Is he not allowed to have a bad day? John is the sweetest guy, by the way. I love using John because it's really like nothing with the example, right? So he says we have to live in society being mindful that as much as others have thorns that we are very quick to see and acknowledge, so do we. We have thorns. We have thorns. A beautiful rose has thorns. It's able to beautify the path of those that encounter it, release beautiful fragrance in the house, but if we are not careful and we touch it really harsh, we get prickled. And it hurts. And so the thorny tells us that we need to work through the difficulties, removing our own thorns as to not suffocate the seeds. What are some of the thorns that we carry? Pride, vanity. What else? Ego. Selfishness. They're all thorns, and we have them. Some thorns are big and some are tiny, and that's okay. Because through working out the difficulties that we have in society where we are called upon to live in the Spiritist Center relationships, at home, we are invited to remove our own thorns and not be so hurt by the thorns of others, developing a compassionate view of the other, understanding them, trying to understand them. When Divaldo was here during the event that we had, I said, Divaldo, why is it so hard to love everybody? He said, this is an illusion. Everything is love. Hatred is the love that is sick, that is asleep. The worst kind is the indifference, because it's the idea of love that has died, but it hasn't. When Christ talks about reconciling with our enemies, he says that the Spirit, the immortal Spirit, who already understands about love, sends signal to the subconscious. It's inevitable that we reconcile with our enemies. It's inevitable. It's going to happen whether we like it or not. Me personally, I was like, no, I'm not going to love that person. Yeah, you will. You already do. That's why you're so resistant. But pride sets in because we are hurt by the thorn of the other who caused us so much pain. So what do? We follow the guidelines. We embrace the teachings of Christ. And little by little, the signals from the heart, from the spirit to the subconscious will remind us of things that we have long forgotten in the relationship with the other. Forgiveness will set in. It's inevitable because love is irresistible. And that's the truth. So, the thorny places, but then some fell on the good ground. Good ground soil or hearts are those that have goodwill towards life, difficulties, challenges. The true Christian spiritist, and here I am going to say Christian spiritist because Christ is our role model. We can't remove Christ from spiritism. The true Christian spiritist acknowledges the teachings and tries to put into practice. And even though it still has a thorny soil or a rocky one, and although sometimes it sits on the wayside of the road waiting for the scattered seeds to sprout, it already starts working towards having goodwill towards life. Because the seeds, the Word of God, is the good news. And we have forgotten that. When we become discouraged in the practice of the Christian principles, we have forgotten that Spiritism, that the good news of Christ comes to bring joy and happiness and faith in the future. And we forget it. We allow the current situation of society to take over. And we forget about the true light that is guiding our growth. What kind of seed am I? What kind of seed are you? It is the kind of person that demonstrates an acceptance of God's will, that applies the fruit of perseverance, regardless of what life throws their way. We have the gospel that explains the present causes of affliction and the past causes of afflictions, that shows us yet again that we are millennial, immortal spirits, that this is not the first time we have existed on the physical plane, and it's not going to be the last. And a lot of people I was watching, people have access to mediums asking about their previous lives. Was I a queen? Was I a king? I want to know about now. I want to know about now because I have a body of knowledge that tells me that the most significant existence that we can have is the present one. That it doesn't matter what we were, not even in this life. What I was 10 years ago doesn't matter. If I have changed, if I have transformed, if I have grown. It doesn't matter the mistakes that I have made. Will I make the same mistakes again? No. So they brought me to be who I am, and so I embrace every single mistake that I have made. It's the kind of good ground type of soil. It is the one that sees himself or herself as a spiritual plant being cultivated by the divine sower, sent by God, our Master Jesus, who keeps a watchful eye, who sends us the nutrients that oftentimes has to do with taking away pests. Who here likes to take medicine? I don't. But it's necessary sometimes. And as the initial message said, it cuts away what needs to be redesigned. The crop, taking away the seeds, the weeds that are unnecessary for our growth. Sometimes it has to do with toxic relationships. that we try at all moments to maintain in our lives, because we don't believe that we deserve better, that we deserve to be happy. I'm not talking about giving up on relationships. I'm talking about the fact that often we try to keep things that are toxic, causing unnecessary afflictions in the actual times. Things that we don't need to go through. The good ground seed recognizes its beauty. That's the truth. Recognizes itself as a unique plant that beautifies the way. Recognizes that it deserves all the nutrients, everything that God has in store for it to grow and flourish and provide good fruits. Sowing, germination, fertilization, growth, usefulness, blooming, fruitification, and harvest is the position of the Spiritist, of the Christian, of the being who realizes that there is a process in everything, as in nature, but also for our spiritual self. As we evolve, as we progress, spiritually speaking, there is a process. Nothing in nature grows, develops like that. True? There's a saying in Portuguese that is very common. I'm not sure how to translate that into English, but a natureza não dá saltos. It doesn't skip over phases. It doesn't skip over the type of process that it needs to go through. That's why the seed is used. We see a beautiful sequoia that is hundreds of years of age. And we forget the process that it naturally went through to create an awe before those who stand beneath it and look up the beauty of nature. Cesar Said states that inside every human being there is a giant spirit waiting to break through, to cause an impact in society, to make a difference in someone's life. And a lot of people get discouraged in saying, I am so little and I don't make a difference in this society. Nobody's recognizing my efforts. Why should I continue? Finally, some seed fell on good ground and produced a crop, some hindering 100 to 1, others 60, and others 30. In telling us that we are all able to produce regardless of how much or how little, that we should stop comparing ourselves to others, that there is an immense field of crops, of harvesting, of sowing in the world where we are invited to partake. Getting out of the position of being a seed or a soil and becoming sowers. Emmanuel states that in reality, we become co-workers with Jesus. When we take the position of being simple participants in nature, watching the beautification and start proactively sowing and producing. Some 100 to 1, others 60, and others 30. It tells us that we are all able to produce, that we are all able to do great things in society. That it can start at the Spiritist Center, that it can start at a hospital visiting sick children, that it starts at home when we educate a being for them to develop into a good man or a good woman. We all have missions that have been entrusted upon us. And what Emmanuel tells us is that it's time for us to step out of the wayside of the road. Start working on the stony field of our hearts. Remove the thorns. Become the good ground. And eventually grow so much that we become sowers. And this is why he states, as we learn the science of extracting ourselves from the dark jail of the self, we start a journey through the great continent called everyone's interest. And it is in infinite expanse we find the land of the souls, choked with thorns, filled with misery, covered with stones, thus offering us a divine opportunity to act for the good of all. This is so beautiful, so beautiful. Everyone's interest is what is at stake. It's no longer my own interest that prevails over someone else's. If we were all to take this kind of stance in society, can you imagine how many are we here today? Maybe 30, 40. If 30 and 40 minds thought like this and started working, promoting the construction of a better world, we touch other people to wish to do the same. He states, it's an invitation to stop admiring those who do great things and be the one who do things. And as Mother Teresa said, even if it's small, but with great love. With great love. Let us leave our inhibitions behind and learn with the Master to go out and to sow. Because Paul stated, we are co-workers with God. You are God's fields, God building. If you have received the lighted torch of the gospel for your journey, then consider yourself automatically instated as co-workers of Jesus' ministry. If we wish to live better, we need to start asking, what can I do to promote a better society? And so the other day we posted something on the website that created a bit of commotion in talking about how we choose political parties part, divide. And we see a rage of hatred, growing numbers of people attacking each other, as if that's going to modify the society that we live in, when we could be making a different type of movement that talks about peacefulness and love in action, love for our neighbors. So, be an angel of fraternity to those who follow you, dominated by affliction, ignorance, and suffering. And if you're feeling discouraged, this is Emmanuel saying, light a new flame of encouragement in your soul and press on. When you plant the joy of living in the hearts around you, then very soon the flowers and fruit of your sowing will enrich your pathway. So let us press on. Thank you so much for your attention.